I refused to lend my dad money for his medical emergency and he showed up at my workplace. Turns out he was in debt to dangerous loan sharks due to his secret gambling addiction. I, 28F, have always had a complicated relationship with my father, Austin, 52M. To understand the complexity, I need to take you back to my childhood. My parents' marriage was tumultuous from the start. Mom, Amanda, 50F, was a practical, hard-working woman who'd grown up in a middle-class family. Dad, on the other hand, came from old money, but his family had lost most of their fortune due to his grandfather's poor investments. I remember the constant arguments about money when I was young. Mom would be furious about a new gadget Dad had bought or an expensive night out with his friends. Dad always had an excuse: it was a necessary purchase for work, or he needed to maintain appearances for his business contacts. Looking back, I realize these were early signs of his inability to manage money responsibly. The breaking point came when I was 10. I remember that day vividly. It was my best friend's birthday party, and Mom had come to pick me up early. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was trying hard not to cry in front of me. That night, she sat me down and explained that she and Dad were getting a divorce. She tried to sugarcoat it, saying they had grown apart, but even at that age, I knew it was more complicated than that. After the divorce, I spent most of my childhood bouncing between their homes. Mom worked long hours as a paralegal, often taking on extra shifts to make ends meet. She'd come home exhausted but always made time to help me with homework or listen to my day. Dad's situation was different. He lived in a nice apartment and seemed to always have time for fun activities, but I noticed he'd often ask Mom for extra money, claiming it was for my expenses. As I got older, I started to see through Dad's charm. I remember one incident when I was 15. Dad had promised to take me on a camping trip for my birthday. I was so excited, counting down the days. But 2 days before we were supposed to leave, he called to cancel. He said something had come up at work, but I overheard him later on the phone, talking about a poker game. I was devastated, but I didn't confront him. Instead, I bottled up my disappointment, a habit that would continue into my adult years. Despite these letdowns, I tried to maintain a good relationship with Dad. I told myself that he was trying his best, that he loved me in his own way. When I got accepted to college, he was the first person I called. He sounded genuinely proud, promising to help with tuition. But as the first semester approached, the promised help never materialized. Mom ended up taking out additional loans to cover what my scholarships didn't. College was a turning point for me. Away from the push and pull of my parents' dynamics, I started to see things more clearly. I made friends whose parents had healthy relationships, and I realized how much my own family situation had affected me. I started seeing a counselor at the university, working through my issues with trust and self-worth. After graduation, I landed a job at a small tech startup in the city. It wasn't glamorous, long hours, modest pay, but it was mine. I found an apartment with 2 roommates and started building my own life. For the first time, I felt truly independent. When Dad found out about my job, he seemed genuinely happy for me. He took me out to a fancy dinner to celebrate, regaling me with stories of his own early career successes. It felt like we were finally connecting as adults. But looking back, I realized this dinner was the beginning of a new, troubling phase in our relationship. It started small. A week after our dinner, Dad called, asking if he could borrow $50 for gas. He'd left his wallet at home, he said, and needed to make it to an important meeting. I transferred the money without hesitation. A few weeks later, it was $100 for an overdue electric bill. The excuses were always plausible, and the amount seemed manageable. But as months passed, the requests became more frequent and for larger amounts. He'd call me at odd hours, spinning tales of urgent needs. One night, he called at 2 a.m., saying his car had broken down and he needed $500 for repairs. Half asleep and worried, I sent the money. The next day, I saw him post on social media about a great night out with friends, with no mention of car trouble. I started to feel like an ATM rather than his daughter. Our conversations revolved around money, either him asking for it or me asking when he'd pay me back. The promised repayments never came, always pushed back with a new excuse. The final straw came last month. Dad called, sounding distressed, saying he needed $5,000 for a medical procedure. My heart raced. Was he seriously ill? Had I been too harsh in my judgments? I asked for more details, wanting to help but also wary of his past behavior. Dad became evasive, changing the subject and guilt-tripping me about being an ungrateful daughter. He brought up sacrifices he'd made for me, conveniently forgetting the child support payments he'd often missed and the emotional toll his unreliability had taken on me. As he talked, a sick feeling grew in my stomach. Something wasn't adding up. I pressed further, insisting on knowing the truth before I transferred any money. Finally, he broke down and admitted he needed the money to pay off a gambling debt. He'd gotten in too deep at a local casino and owed money to some dangerous people. I was shocked and hurt by his lie. All the times he'd asked for money flashed through my mind. How many of those requests were related to gambling? How long had this been going on? I felt used and manipulated. I refused to give him the money and told him I wouldn't be lending him any more in the future. Dad exploded, his tone changing from pleading to angry in an instant. He called me selfish and ungrateful, saying I owed him for raising me. The argument ended with me hanging up on him, my hands shaking. Since then, he's been bombarding me with messages and calls, alternating between apologies and guilt trips. Some family members have reached out, urging me to forgive him and help him out. They claim he's going through a rough patch and needs support. But they don't know the full story, the years of manipulation and broken promises. I'm torn. Part of me feels guilty for turning my back on my father. I remember the good times, him teaching me to ride a bike, cheering at my high school graduation. But another part is angry at his manipulation and lies. I feel like I've been trying to earn his love and approval my whole life, and I'm exhausted. Am I the asshole for refusing to help him and considering cutting him out of my life? I feel like I'm at a crossroads, and I don't know which path to take. Update 1: It's been about 2 weeks since my initial post, and I'm still reeling from everything that's happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and advice. Reading through your responses has been both comforting and eye-opening. After my post, I decided to take some time to reflect on my relationship with Austin. I dug out old photo albums and journals, trying to piece together a timeline of our relationship. It was a painful exercise, bringing up memories I'd long suppressed. I realized that this pattern of behavior wasn't new, it had been going on for years, and I had been enabling it without even realizing it. One memory, in particular, stood out. When I was 17, I'd saved up money from my part-time job to buy a used car. The day before I was going to make the purchase, Dad called, saying he needed to borrow my savings for an investment opportunity. He promised to double my money within a month. Excited by the prospect and wanting to believe in him, I agreed. Needless to say, I never saw that money again, and the car remained a distant dream. Reliving these memories strengthened my resolve to stand my ground. I decided to maintain the no-contact rule I had established, changing my phone number and blocking him on social media. It was hard, but I felt it was necessary for my mental health. However, Austin wasn't going to let me go that easily. A few days after our argument, he showed up at my workplace unannounced. I was in a meeting when my colleague, Lisa, messaged me saying there was a man insisting on seeing me in the lobby. My heart sank, I knew it had to be him. When I went down, I found Austin pacing back and forth, looking disheveled and agitated. His usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by wrinkled clothes and unkempt hair. As soon as he saw me, he rushed over, pleading for me to hear him out. The desperation in his eyes made me waver, and I reluctantly agreed to talk to him, but only for a few minutes. We stepped outside to the small park across from my office. That's when he dropped a bombshell. He claimed he was in trouble with some dangerous people due to his gambling debts. Austin said he owed a local loan shark a significant amount of money, and if he didn't pay soon, they had threatened to harm him or his family. He begged me to lend him the money, promising he'd pay me back as soon as he could. He even offered to sign a contract or give me his car as collateral. As he spoke, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe him and help. After all, he was my father, and the thought of him being in danger was terrifying. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another manipulation tactic. I'd fallen for his stories so many times before. I told Austin that I needed time to think about it and that I'd get back to him. He seemed desperate but agreed to give me some time. As I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped and head down, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I being too harsh? Back at my desk, I couldn't focus on work. My mind kept replaying Austin's words, trying to separate truth from potential lies. That evening, I called my mom, needing her perspective. To my surprise, she wasn't shocked at all by Austin's claims about gambling debts. Mom revealed that Austin had always had issues with gambling, even during their marriage. She had kept it from me to protect me, but now she felt I needed to know the truth. She told me about how Austin's gambling had led to them losing their house when I was very young, an event I had no memory of. This, she said, was the real reason for their divorce, not the growing apart story I had been told. I listened in stunned silence as Mom recounted incidents from their marriage, maxed out credit cards, mysterious withdrawals from their joint account, Austin's mood swings depending on whether he'd won or lost. She warned me to be careful and not to give him any money, as it would likely go straight to his addiction. After the call, I felt like my whole childhood had been built on lies. Memories I had of a happy family before the divorce now seemed tainted. I spent the next few days processing everything and trying to decide what to do. On one hand, I was worried about Austin's safety if his story about the loan shark was true. On the other hand, I couldn't trust him, and I didn't want to enable his addiction. After much deliberation, I decided to reach out to Austin's sister, my Aunt Emma, 55F. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She and Austin had a falling out long ago, and she'd mostly kept her distance from the family. When I called her, she was surprised to hear from me but listened patiently as I explained everything. Aunt Emma confirmed that Austin had indeed been struggling with gambling for years. She shared stories from their childhood, painting a picture of a charming but irresponsible young man who always thought he was one lucky break away from solving all his problems. She had tried to help him multiple times, even paying off his debts once, but he always fell back into old habits. She advised me not to give him any money, as it would only perpetuate the cycle. Armed with this new information, I made my decision. I called Austin and told him that while I cared about him, I couldn't give him the money. Instead, I offered to help him find resources for gambling addiction. I had researched local support groups and treatment centers, hoping he would take me up on the offer. He didn't take it well. Austin accused me of abandoning him in his time of need, saying I was no better than his sister who had turned her back on him years ago. He fluctuated between anger and pleading, trying every emotional lever he could think of. Finally, he threatened to cut me out of his life if I didn't help him. As painful as it was, I stood my ground. I told Austin that until he was ready to get help for his addiction, I needed to keep my distance for my own well-being. The call ended with him hanging up on me, leaving me feeling drained and conflicted. In the days that followed, I oscillated between feeling confident in my decision and being racked with guilt. I kept imagining worst-case scenarios of what might happen to Austin if he couldn't pay his debts. But I also knew that giving in wouldn't solve the underlying problem. I'm still processing everything that's happened. While I feel guilty, I also feel a sense of relief. It's like I've put down a heavy burden I didn't even realize I was carrying. I know I made the right decision, but it doesn't make it any easier. For now, I'm focusing on my own life and well-being. I've decided to take a short vacation to clear my head and gain some perspective. I've also started looking into therapy options for myself, recognizing that I have a lot to unpack from my childhood and this recent situation. I'll update again if anything significant happens. Thank you all again for your support and advice. It's been a challenging time, but I'm hopeful that better days are ahead. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and the situation with Austin has taken some unexpected turns. I returned from my vacation feeling refreshed and more confident in my decision to maintain boundaries with him. I had spent a week at a small beach town, alternating between long walks on the shore and quiet evenings with a book. The time away had given me clarity, and I felt ready to move forward with my life. However, life had other plans. About a week after I got back, I received a frantic call from my cousin, Tom, 30M, Austin's nephew. Tom and I had never been particularly close. He lived in another state, and we only saw each other at occasional family gatherings. So when his name popped up on my phone, I knew something was wrong. Tom's voice was shaky as he told me that Austin had been hospitalized after being found unconscious in a seedy motel room on the outskirts of town. Apparently, he had overdosed on a combination of alcohol and pills. The doctors weren't sure if it was a suicide attempt or accidental, but either way, it was serious. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Despite my reservations and the boundaries I had set, Austin was still my father. The thought of him alone in a hospital bed, fighting for his life, made my heart ache. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to go to the hospital. When I arrived, I found Aunt Emma already there. She looked older than I remembered, her face lined with worry. Austin was in the ICU, stable but still unconscious. The sight of him lying there, pale and connected to various machines, was shocking. He had always seemed larger than life, with his booming laugh and animated gestures. Now, he looked small and vulnerable. As we waited for Austin to regain consciousness, Aunt Emma filled me in on what had happened in the past month. Apparently, after I refused to give him money, Austin had become increasingly desperate. He had borrowed money from anyone who would lend it, including some questionable characters. When he couldn't pay them back, things had gotten ugly. Emma told me about late-night phone calls she'd received from Austin, his voice slurred and panicky. He'd talk about people following him, about needing to skip town. She had tried to convince him to get help, but he always refused, insisting he could handle it on his own. The night before he was found, Austin had called Emma in a panic, saying he was in trouble and needed help. She had tried to calm him down and offered to come get him, but he had hung up abruptly. The next morning, the motel staff found him unconscious in his room. As we were talking, a police officer arrived at the hospital. He informed us that they had found evidence in Austin's motel room suggesting he was involved in some illegal activities, possibly related to his gambling debts. They wanted to question him once he was conscious. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger at Austin for getting himself into this mess, guilt for not helping him, and fear for what might happen next. Aunt Emma squeezed my hand, reminding me that none of this was my fault and that Austin had made his own choices. Austin regained consciousness the next day. When he saw me there, he broke down crying, apologizing for everything he had put me through. He admitted that he had hit rock bottom and realized he needed help. The incident had scared him straight, and he wanted to make amends. I listened to him, my emotions a mix of relief, skepticism, and lingering anger. I had heard promises of change before, and they rarely stuck. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, to hope that this time would be different. But the rational part of my brain reminded me of all the broken promises and manipulations of the past. I told Austin that while I was glad he was okay, I needed to see real, sustained effort on his part before I could trust him again. His eyes filled with tears as he nodded, seeming to understand the damage his actions had caused to our relationship. The next few days were a blur of medical updates, police questioning, and family discussions. The police questioned Austin about his involvement in the illegal activities they had uncovered. To protect him, Aunt Emma hired a lawyer to be present during the questioning. Austin cooperated fully, providing information about the people he had borrowed money from and the pressure they had put on him. As I sat in the hospital waiting room during one of these questioning sessions, I found myself reflecting on the complex emotions I was experiencing. There was relief that Austin was alive and seemingly ready to change, but also a deep-seated weariness born from years of disappointment. I realized that regardless of what happened with Austin, I needed to prioritize my own mental health and well-being. In the days that followed, Austin agreed to enter a rehabilitation program for his gambling addiction and alcohol abuse. The lawyer worked out a deal with the police. In exchange for Austin's cooperation in bringing down the loan shark operation, they would be lenient with any charges against him. As for me, I'm still processing everything that's happened. I've decided to maintain limited contact with Austin while he goes through rehab. I want to support his recovery, but I also need to protect myself emotionally. It's a delicate balance, and I'm not always sure if I'm making the right choices. I've started seeing a therapist to help me work through my feelings about all of this. It's been helpful to have a neutral party to talk to about the complicated emotions I'm experiencing. We've been exploring my childhood experiences and how they've shaped my relationships and decision-making as an adult. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. I'm cautiously optimistic about Austin's commitment to change, but I'm also prepared for the possibility of disappointment. I've learned that I can't control Austin's actions or decisions, only my own responses to them. I'll update again if there are any significant developments. Thank you all for your support and advice throughout this challenging time. Update 3. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have progressed. A lot has changed, both with Austin and in my own life. First, the good news: Austin has been sticking to his rehabilitation program. He completed the initial 90-day inpatient treatment and has been regularly attending both Gamblers Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. His therapist reports that he's been making steady progress in addressing the root causes of his addictions. The legal situation has also been resolved. Thanks to Austin's cooperation, the authorities were able to bring down a significant part of the loan shark operation. As promised, they were lenient with Austin. He received probation and mandatory continued participation in addiction treatment programs. As for our relationship, it's been a slow process of rebuilding trust. We started with short, supervised visits while he was in rehab, which gradually increased as he showed consistent progress. We now have regular weekly phone calls and monthly in-person meetings. During one of our recent meetings, Austin gave me a letter he had written as part of his 12-step program. In it, he took full responsibility for his actions and the pain he had caused me over the years. He apologized for the lies, the manipulation, and the financial burden he had placed on me. Reading it was an emotional experience, but it felt like a significant step forward in our relationship. However, it hasn't all been smooth sailing. There have been moments of tension and disagreement. Austin sometimes still struggles with accepting full responsibility for his actions, occasionally slipping into old habits of making excuses or deflecting blame. When this happens, I've learned to calmly but firmly call him out on it. I've also had to set and maintain clear boundaries. I made it clear that while I support his recovery, I will not provide any financial assistance. This has been challenging for both of us, but it's necessary for maintaining a healthy relationship. On a personal note, this experience has led me to make some changes in my own life. I've been exploring codependency issues in therapy and learning how to have healthier relationships. I've also started volunteering at a local organization that supports families affected by addiction, which has been incredibly rewarding. My relationship with my mom and Aunt Emma has grown stronger through all of this. We've had many conversations about the past, filling in gaps in my understanding of our family history. It's been painful at times, but ultimately healing. Looking ahead, I'm cautiously optimistic. Austin seems committed to his recovery, and I'm proud of the progress he's made. However, I'm also realistic. I know that recovery is a lifelong process, and there may be setbacks along the way. For now, I'm focusing on my own growth and well-being while supporting Austin's recovery from a distance. It's a delicate balance, but I'm learning to navigate it day by day. I want to thank everyone who has offered support and advice throughout this journey. Your words have been a source of strength and guidance. While the future is uncertain, I feel better equipped to handle whatever comes my way.